Quarkus Inside, episode 9, Wonders of GraphQL, with Phillip Krüger as our special guest. Hello everyone. I don't know for Max, but I had no idea we would manage to make it pretty much on time for 9 episodes in a row. So, congrats to us.
Oh, we made it on time, but we missed one with the content. But
that's
details.
Details, and we're very agile. That's the key point.
Yeah.
So you see the big man here. He's here to talk about GraphQL. He couldn't make his webcam so since he has to use his hands to code, you're gonna bear with us with a slightly bigger version of us, or maybe Max and I that are a bit small. So thanks, Philip, for not last minute, but fairly short time to talk about that. Before we go there, we had a couple of news we wanted to address. The first one is there is a CR version of 1.6 that is out with a lot of interesting things done, like improvement around remote dev, GraalVM 20.1 support, Google Functions support, newest version of SmallRide Reactive. We did a bunch of work to make the Gradle support. Our objective is to make it out of beta, like we feel it's stable and reaching our goals. So we've killed a lot of open issues, which is a good thing. There are other works going on in that release. So please give it a test before we actually release officially Quarkus. That'll be a good feedback from you before we release that to the wild. What were the other subjects? Oh yeah, the other subject I wanted to show you is that in my voice is very low, so check that right away. Sound.
Same bundle as last time, apparently.
It shouldn't, because I'm not muted this time around. Where is my...
Well, while you're trying that, I'll tell the news. So there's next week, we have two next insights. So there's next week is going to be Bisham, and I won't make it because I'm on PTO. We've got Georges to join in. And the week after, we are doing a Mutiny Part 2, because it actually turns out we had a lot of questions when Clement was here. So we'll pick up there, and at that time, Emmanuel is lost somewhere in a move. So we have running in there again. Did you manage to get your voice fixed, Emmanuel?
I think so. Hopefully it's better for everyone. So let me know.
Something changed at least.
Yeah, something changed.
Okay.
The other stuff is, I don't know if people noticed, but we have support for gRPC in Quarkus 1.5. This is the first round with a lot of potential improvement down the line around the usability of the technology, especially with regard to build time and stuff like that. So please give us some feedback around that. And Max, you might be able to talk a bit about that, but we do have Quarkus tools for IntelliJ 1.0.0 that has been released. And
oh yeah, I forgot. Yes, that was actually last week, and Jeff released it as a 1.0. And the big change this year is we had some issues with stability. It was using an external plugin for what's called the language service protocol. That's caused some issues. That has now been changed, and a bunch of other features around microprofile, content assist, and helping. So it's not out there. So if anyone using IntelliJ, let us know. And just for people to know, IntelliJ themselves actually are doing Quarkus tools too, but that's only available in the commercial version, whereas the tools we're doing here is both available for the community and the product. There is some overlaps, but we try to keep them compatible with each other, so to speak. And we got Vinci saying your voice is still not good.
Yeah, I don't know how to make it better at this stage. We're gonna have to run for
that. But you sound different from me. Anyway, then if my voice is okay, I'll Jan and say we have Phillip here. If maybe you want to give an introduction about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Phillip. I live in South Africa. I work for Red Hat specifically in the SmallRide team, and I mostly work with SmallRide GraphQL and microprofile GraphQL and OpenAPI, SmallRide OpenAPI and microprofile OpenAPI.
And it's actually the first time we're meeting. I remember, or over email, we talked like some months back, and I heard you were doing a GraphQL, and I said to you, we need to talk because I don't get the full, I get at GraphQL from the client side, but not fully from the server side stuff. So you promised to talk, and that's what we're doing here. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to give a short, what's GraphQL and why you want to use it? I think you have a demo.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it will be explained in the demo, but my definition is it's a query language for your API. So it allows you to build an API that is queryable, which gives your consumers much more power. So your consumer can be much more definite about what they want and only get that. The main things that it tries to address is overfetching and underfetching, which we currently have with the REST, where I can publish a REST endpoint, and this REST endpoint provide data, let's say a person. So my example is going to be a person, and that person can have many fields. And I've seen examples where the person specifically has 70 plus fields, and I'm building a mobile website or a mobile app, and I just want to get the name of this person. So I need to get over my mobile, could be 2G if you're in Africa, connection, 70 fields just to filter out everything and get one. So that's overfetching. I fetch way too much data, and this allows me to say exactly what data I'm interested in. And then underfetching is when I want to get some details of the person, but also some detail of maybe another person, or in my example, I'm going to use a score. So we're going to score a person. It's like a gamification of a person where a person can get a score. And I want the score as well. So my initial call to get the person wasn't enough. I had to make a subsequent call to get the score, and that's underfetching. I didn't get all the data that I want. And then the combination of the two is if my two calls that I make is overfetching. So I have overfetching and underfetching just to get the data that I want. So that's kind of what it's trying to solve.
And the way around that in classical REST is you will literally have to have different endpoints, like one with I want the summary of the user, and one I want also the score, and then duplicate a lot of that to make it happen. And Max, we come from the data side, and our way to fix that was not to have one query for each, but rather have people provide inside the query the ability to fetch extra information and filter stuff out. So that's how you sort of fix that problem with a query language from the middleware to the data side, to the database rather.
Yeah, as for me, the time I kind of GraphQL was when GitHub introduced their GraphQL API, and I suddenly was able to do more. Like I could not just get what I needed, but I can also get them more efficiently. For example, if you want to do I have a bot that does some epic. So if you have an epic issues number listed in your issue, I want to collect all those issues. So in the REST API, I literally had to go and get every IDE. But in GraphQL, like the API they have there, I can just say, give me this list of them, and then they come back. And then I could basically do more queries, and I could also go and say, hey, of all the stuff you send me back, only give me these three fields, like description and the URL. And that meant I was getting more value, and I was using less bandwidth. So that was that was when I go like, oh, this actually is more than just a hype thing. But I just go like, oh, gonna implement that on the server side. Sorry for my French. But that's what you're gonna tell me we can do much better.
So the way that I got to GraphQL is exactly what Emmanuel just said, is that we built REST endpoints at a previous company that I was, and we continued to build the same REST endpoint for a different consumer with a little tweak, because every consumer wanted something special. I don't want all this data, or can you add this, or can you do this? And we just ended up building the same endpoint, exposing it like a one-to-one relationship with the consumer. That was our one option. Or we had to just say, tough is you just have to get all the data and do it yourself, which they weren't happy with. And the other option is trying to get Hatios right, which I think is quite hard to do, and you still might not solve the actual problem.
Okay, so how about we start showing code now? Because it's all fine, it's solving the world, it's awesome, and then maybe the concrete steps are crap. So let's figure that out.
Okay.
So let me share your screen.
Yeah.
There you go.
So in my demo, I'm gonna talk you through how I got to my demo, but I'm gonna jump to already kind of change some stuff. But I just went to code.quarkus.io and I selected, by default, JAX-RS is selected, even though we don't need JAX-RS for GraphQL. I'm going to build a JAX-RS service and then convert it to GraphQL to show how similar they are from a developer's point of view. I also selected JSONB because the JAX-RS service returns JSON. And then I added small array open API because JAX-RS doesn't have a schema. So if you want a schema, you have to add it with small array open API. Then I added GraphQL. And then I'm going to show open tracing, security, and metrics, if we get there, just how that's integrated with GraphQL. So I added those. So can you see my IDE now?
Yep.
Yeah.
NetBeans. So who is using NetBeans in the audience? You will get a free, a free version of NetBeans if you do.
Yeah, this is NetBeans 12. It's been released like a month or so ago. It's now under Apache, and it's actually an awesome IDE. Anyway, so I've modified the REST endpoint that you get with code.quarkus, and this is a basic customer service that under the path REST will return a person. So you can pass in the person ID here, it'll return the person. I've tagged it, so this is OpenAPI, so this is to describe it a little bit, but OpenAPI actually does the documentation for all of this. And then person itself is quite a big object, like I said. This one isn't that big, it's not 70 fields, but it actually, just to show how it looks like, it looks something like this, right? So it's a fairly big object. It contains other complex objects, like it has a credit card, that's another object that has a number, and so on. So it's a fairly complex POJO. And obviously under the covers,
I like how you use UML to scare people off. It's like, look how complex that is.
Yes, I'll go back to that a bit later. So under the covers, JAX-RS will obviously make sure that this person is going to be marshaled to JSON via JSONB and then streamed over the network. So if I run this, this is just running it in dev mode. So this is just doing a Quarkus dev. And I'm running off a 999 snapshot because there's some bug that's not yet in 1.6. I'm hoping I hope it's going to be in 1.6, fixed a vertex bug for hot reloading. Right. So now if I go to Swagger UI, which you get with OpenAPI, you'll see the generated OpenAPI page. And this is the schema basically. So you can, for instance, here also see this is how a person looks like, and a person has a credit card, and a credit card has all of that. This is generated by OpenAPI. And I can now go and say, okay, let me get person 1. This does a get like you would in JAX-RS, but it does return everything, right? Which is quite a lot of information. Now, if I only want, let's say, the name and the surname. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just copy this and paste it, and we'll call it customer GraphQL API. And I can actually just do it inside the same class here. It's just a lot of annotations then. So what we'll do is we'll replace this with @GraphQL API. You can, if you want to also do a description, you can do @description and give it a description. It doesn't, it's just for the schema actually. And we'll still inject, so I just have this in-memory database, pretend database, so we'll keep that. We'll remove all of this, and we'll just say this is a query, and we'll remove this. And now I have a GraphQL endpoint, very similar to, okay, and then I can obviously remove all the imports. So now I have a GraphQL endpoint that will return a person, same as the JAX-RS service, but the person now is actually, I can define what I want on there. So similar to Swagger UI, there's a UI for GraphQL that's also included in Quarkus. So you can go to localhost 8080 and then GraphQL UI.
By the way, small tip, if you go localhost 8080 and you type, foobar, then you'll get an error page that will show you, that should show you the Swagger UI as well as the GraphQL UI links at the bottom. There you go. So if you don't know which one, there is an easy way to get access to those links.
Yeah. Right. So the first thing that I want to show here is that without having to add an extra API like OpenAPI for JAX-RS, GraphQL has built-in a schema. So by default, I can actually query the schema. I can see that there's a person that I can, again, get the credit card, and you can traverse the query. So this is all built in. And because it's
a tiny bit bigger, if you
yes,
can,
sorry.
Plus a couple of times. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll show that again. So you can kind of browse the query. This gets generated by SmallRye in the background. So when you build something that returns a person, we'll go and find all the fields on it. And you've got some control over it, like @ignore. We actually support JSON-B annotation, so you can change the name and so on. So anyway, so I can now say that I want a person, and I've got code inside because there's a schema. And then I can say I want person ID 1, so similar to what we've done in REST. But now I can actually say, what is it that I want? So I only want the names and the surname. And then I only get that back, which obviously is a much smaller payload than what we saw in JAX-RS. So that's solving the overfetching problem, that I can define exactly what it is that I'm interested in.
So just to clarify, so here it's in memory database, but let's pretend it's a normal database. So you would have fetched the whole person, but then instead of sending the whole person to the mobile clients, you would have filtered out to just have the names and the surname. And
yes.
That's where you get the big, go ahead.
Yeah, and what we're working on, I'm actually busy working on it at the moment, is a context object which will allow you to inject the context anywhere downstream. Mm-hmm. So if your data is stored in a relational database or a document store or whatever, you can, just before you make that query, inject the context, get what the question was, and optimize your query so that you optimize on both sides. You optimize on when you fetch the data and when you stream it over the network. So hopefully that will be in the next version of SmallRye, and after that in the specification.
Okay. Let me inject an interesting question we had, which is hold on, let me try and find it. Okay. What if I need to fetch data from 3 different microservices and somehow merge the response for all of those 3 microservices and then show it in the UI? Can I apply GraphQL in this context? That's Carlos asking.
Yeah. You can either code that facade yourself and then go and fetch it, because where the data comes from, GraphQL or microprofile GraphQL doesn't really care where the data comes from. So it could be a database, it could be in memory like my example, or it could be another service which you can go and fetch. So you can build that service yourself, or you can look at a gateway. And there's actually, I can't remember the name now, but there is a few projects that has, I know Apollo has got one, but there's one that's built in Red Hat that has a gateway where you can basically just hook up any of the schemas. So you can define the GraphQL schemas, configure those, and it will merge it for you and make 3 GraphQL's endpoints 1. So that.
Okay.
you've got a choice there.
So if you have zero, if you want to add zero value over like fetching something, you would say fetch, object A, B, or C, and depending on that, the gateway will go and redirect to the underlying microservice.
Yeah.
Does it assume that the underlying microservice is a GraphQL endpoint itself, or it doesn't have to be?
In the gateway example that I spoke about, yes. But again, there's other tools that allows you to convert REST endpoints to GraphQL endpoints, so you can still solve it, in that way. But it wouldn't be.
And the other stuff is that I guess my gateway could be smart. So in this case, you would write a Quarkus app that define that schema, call the traditional, well, let's say the one microservice that is returning a bit too much, and then let the user expose the GraphQL endpoint and to filter stuff out. So you will consume, let's say, quote unquote, lots of bandwidth on the data center side, but at least when you want to reach the client, then you have filtered out the crap you don't really care about.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't require GraphQL on the inner microservice, because you would just call the microservice in a classical way and then do the filtering. Have the GraphQL endpoint do the filtering.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. So I'm going to continue, but you can interrupt me obviously anytime if there's questions. So one of the other things that we want to do here is, like I said, we want to get the score for the person. So the score is, in my example, is actually a different data source. I am actually proxying, and I'm pretending to get the score from a total different system. So I can also inject score database like I've done here. Wait, let me put it in the correct place first. So I'll add it to REST first. And I can now return a list of scores. And the person itself doesn't know about score. It doesn't have a score field on it, and that's why I have to do this. So in JAX-RS, back here, if I refresh, I should now have a new service called score. So what I can do now is I can again go and find the person. And in this example, there's some arbitrary ID on this object, which I can use to go and find the score. And now I can combine the data and filter out. So I've now basically done an over and an underfetch. I didn't get enough, so I had to make a subsequent call, but the calls that I made, I overfetched. But now I have enough data to show what I want. If I want to do this in GraphQL, let me zoom this one as well. Yeah. No, I don't want to paste that. So I'm just going to grab this off here and then we'll convert it. Right, so what we can do now is we can actually say that if we want to add scores onto person as a queryable field onto person, even though in Java it doesn't exist. So I can do add source. So when the source is a person, P, and then I can say get person, get ID number. Right. So now, before I click save, I want to show here at the moment, there's no scores field, right? It doesn't exist. But when I do this, it will now add a scores field to person. So I can combine these. So if I refresh this now, there will now be a scores field. And now I can go deeper in. I can say, and I only want the scores name and value. And again, I'm just getting back what I want. And you'll see in the log file now, I went to both methods or both backends. I got the person and the score. If I don't ask for the score, it won't go to the score backend. So it's clever enough to know. So if score is a total different system and it might be slow or down, I don't want to penalize somebody that didn't even ask for the question. Now, what you can do in
that's cool, Max. That answers some of your question, right?
I was like, hey.
So what you can do in REST is you can either do attils like I've explained and add it to person as a URL and then know where to find score, or you can build something like this where you have this profile object that just contains both of them, and then you do the aggregation on the server side. So there's various ways to solve it, but in all the cases you always overfetch still a lot of data. Where here, and I can build now, I can add a source onto score. And I actually have an example where I have events that makes up a score, and I can add that. So you can build the graph as deep as you want, and that's a good or a bad thing.
All right. So Philip, so here's where my head, because I imagine there was something like this that was there. But this is great, by the way, just for the first layer. But if you start just piling on top of like what you're basically doing here is like you're stitching methods or graphs together.
Yep.
But it will have to literally call each of these methods, and then on the server side, you're getting a small tiny payload to the client, but suddenly the server is now querying 3 or 4 methods where it could have done that in one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even worse, it could be like, in the worst case, basically.
So and that's why we want to add the context where you can optimize the backend, and that's also why if you didn't ask for scores, we won't call the method. But if you wanted, whether I make 2 calls or whether I do an aggregated object that does the 2 calls, both of those methods are going to be called REST or GraphQL. This is just easier to code. Yeah.
So that is true. That's what I see.
On that subject, there is an interesting exchange in the show notes about what we could do that would be great. So Marcel led the way. He said, I wonder if Panache can help in making queries more performant. I mean, with GraphQL, we know what client requests, and not only for feed, but also for relations. And I think that would probably be GraphQL with Panache, where somehow with the context feature that Phillip is talking about, that would provide the right information, we might be able to pass along and automate the right call to the GraphQL query, to the GPQL query to optimize. Not if when you have like 2 different databases and need to stitch them together, but when you know this is a single database, then you can what is called push down in the data virtualization space, like push down the query to the system. By the way, people, if you're interested, just join Quarkus Dev. This is an area where we're not sure we can really address like in the next 5 minutes, but if somebody wants to lead the chart, that would be quite awesome.
Okay, so what I want to show next is partial results. So one of the things that can happen is because this scores is, in our example, is a total different database, it could be down. So I can actually, to simulate that, I can just say throw new runtime exception, and we're going to pretend that the system is down. So if I now
before you go on, so probably something related, but Ban was saying I'm kind of looking forward to filtering and paging support, so we don't have to waste time writing filtering logic while using JPA, which is done manually at this stage. But again, this is going to rely on this context object, and then we can do some magic on top of it.
Yeah, we've got. Apart from the context object, one of the other things that's on our to-do list, and we have quite a big to-do list, is a pageable object, which is going to, because you can do paging already, you just have to manually do it. You have to add a field or fields to be able to do the paging. So we want to make it easier by just allowing you to annotate any list return with @pageable, and then we will add that to the GraphQL schema, the fields needed to do paging. There's a ticket open on it if anybody wants to.
And then we could bind it to the page object in Panache QL not Panache QL, but Panache the framework. That'd be interesting. All right, carry on.
Okay, so now if I make a call, you'll see that I now get my runtime exception because that one part is down, but I still get the data that I have back. So I can still kind of survive a little bit. I can show the person, I just can't show the scores. And that'll be for, if I have multiple exceptions, I'll, and more than one of them failed, I'll get multiple errors back, but I get the data that's available, which is also quite cool, I think. The other thing that you can do, let me just quickly fix this again.
Can you control that? Because sometimes if I don't have null means a lot of things, right? It could mean there is no data, or it could mean I don't have the data at this stage, which is the formal definition really. But can I actually still throw an exception? Like, can I make a choice here of how the framework reacts to that? No, on the server side, I guess that's a server side behavior, I suppose. It's a good question. It's an open question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I get the question.
So here
it's like
if you have an exception, you will just replace the data with null and send that back. So how can I customize that behavior? So
what this data?
You could represent it as being scores wasn't there, like the key wasn't there at all, but that would be a more close representation of this. This would break your schema, but I think that's what he's. Or you say scores are like a not here thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. I mean, at the moment, this is all that it can do. What you can control in terms of errors is you'll see that mine just shows server error because it was a runtime error. We hide the actual exception message. So and you can control whether or not that message is visible. And then with checked exceptions, the opposite is true. So we'll show the checked exception message, but you can hide it if you want to, based on config. And one of the changes we're busy with is to also allow annotations there. So you can just annotate your exception message with whether or not what is available on the server side. But this is interesting. I'll make a note of this, whether we can control this field here. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah, because I could imagine many clients would just go,
not look at errors.
data scores.
It's not, and not look at the error. So the other thing that we're also still discussing on the client side, like I said, the client is not yet, it's not in the spec. We're busy playing around with it in Quarkus and SmallRye, and we'll add it as a Quarkus extension soon. But one of the things that we haven't done there is how do we actually handle exceptions. But I'll get to that hopefully. And I'll show what we're busy with. So I've fixed it now again, so it should be back up. So if I do this now, it should return it again. Now, one of the other things that you can do is, let's say you want more than one person. I can say get me person 1, and maybe I also want some of his friends, and I know that I want person 2, and here I only want their name and surname, so I don't care for their score. So we can remove the score, right? And then I can do that. So I can combine more than one query, and they don't even have to be all from the same person. So if I, for instance, just do something like this on the client, on the server side, so I'll do public string hello and string name and return right, just to show another query. It could now be any complex query. This is a very basic one. So I should be able to, why is this red?
Snappies. No, sorry.
Could be. And now it doesn't show me why it's red. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I think this will now break because there's something wrong. Yeah. Okay, let's just remove it. The point is that you can actually add as many queries as you want and then query it in here. So it doesn't have to be all persons or people like I've done here. You can add another query here that and call it whatever you want and combine as many as you want into one, asking exactly what you want.
Do people use it to batch, like in one request, everything they want? Have you seen that on the client side?
That's the use case, I guess. This is batching, right? Yeah.
It could get quite big, obviously. So it's up to you to use it responsibly. Similar with the 1 plus n or n plus 1 problem. One of the other things that we are busy talking about is to define a global depth of a query so that you can't get too complex. So apart from the context object, we're busy talking about how we can define that as well.
By the way, Nando says the error you saw happens a lot in dev mode, and he thinks that's some sort of vertex bug.
Yeah.
So maybe we should go and investigate, where that comes from to hand that down.
So the vertex bugs he's talking about is the reason why I'm running on master, because there's a pull request already for the bug, but it's not merged yet. So I just got that version onto my local host. So it might be something else.
Okay.
So what do I want to show next? Okay, so obviously you can, what I've shown now is like getting a person back. You can also get back a list of people, and then you have the same power. So you can still define on the list what you want to get back. So if I do this, and then I just return person database.get people and make this a query.
By the way, sorry, can you define more than one GraphQL API endpoints? Like some you want person and scores, and then another one you want another set of your graph?
No, there's only one endpoint. So if you want more than one, then you'll have multiple services. Okay. All of this is going to be merged into one endpoint and make it queryable. So now, if I refresh here, I should get back the ability to do people, and I should be able to do the same, right? So I can just get the names for the people, which again in REST, if I do this and the person has 70 fields and I get 10 people back, that's a lot of data. Where now I can control it inside a list as well. Okay, so
since we are on this topic about filtering and stuff, how about filtering based on your role? Like in GitHub, you can only see the email if you are also. Some people you can only see if you're owner and not if you're a normal user.
Yeah, I'm going to show security a bit later.
Okay.
It won't control what you see in the schema because we built the schema, actually in build time in Quarkus.
Sure.
We have spoke about the ability to build a schema based on the roles available and build multiple schemas depending on the role, but we haven't finalized that because that's kind of what you want to do. If you don't even want me to see what I can't see, so in here I can't see addresses if I can't, if I don't have the right to see it.
Well, no. I could see someone might do that. In my use case, it's more just kind of like, I have a GitHub, I have the normal user stuff, and then if you're a owner of the organization, you can see a bit more detail, right? But it's fine, and you can see the data is there. You just don't get it. Like it's just like I don't have access to it.
Yeah, so I'll show that a bit later now.
Let me add one more question. So Ricardo is asking, is it possible to enrich the outcomes with URIs to the actual full resource, or just use the @source annotation?
If I get the question, similar to what you would do in Hatios, where you would actually just add a URI to where to fetch it in REST. That's what he's asking, whether or not that can happen in GraphQL. If I get the question, for me, so the answer, if that's the question, the answer is no, you can't, except if you control it yourself. So you add a field with a source that as a URI, then you can do that. What you can do is, if you want to make this a query as well, you can just add query here, and now it will become not only adding it to person, but also a query in its own right. What the spec itself, we don't talk about the transport layer at all. We don't want to be tied to HTTP. So we don't necessarily, the concept of a URI is maybe specific to the transport layer. At the moment, we've only implemented it using HTTP, but in the future, we will look at other transport layers. So we don't want to tie too much into the underlying transport layer. I don't know if that makes sense, but
that makes sense.
And
let me bolt yet another question. Sorry, that Max wrote down in the Scratchpad is.
Okay.
Does it make sense to have some part of the app being REST endpoints, normal REST endpoints, and some part of the app just being GraphQL, or do people tend to not mix those?
I'm not sure what the tendency is. I definitely mixed it, mostly because I've mixed it with SOAP as well, because if you were like where I worked in a big insurance company and you deal with a lot of external clients, not all the clients is at the same place. So some still wants to send you a file over FTP, some wants to do SOAP, some is doing REST, and some is maybe doing GraphQL. So I typically would have mixed them, so it gives your consumers more choice. But whether or not,
go ahead, Phillip.
Yeah, whether or not I would mix a use case, like at this point, I can do, let's say, get people with a query, but maybe I do the post of JAX-RS to do the creation of a person. I don't know if I'll do that mix, but there might be a use case for it.
Yeah, that was my question really, because I can see the get being like CRUD style, like where you don't want to add too much value besides returning the data, but sometimes the post or the update has quite a bit of a logic to it, and you want to customize that in one fashion or another. I suppose GraphQL, you can accept a query that is a mutating query, or well, you are about to show that, but I suppose then you can put some constraints in it, so that probably would be your way to filter that out.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to add a mutation now. So what you can do is, so
it's
what we'll do here
because it's kind of the visitor pattern for people, right? Which is a weird way to think about the world, but that's what it is. If you accept that it's the visitor pattern, then, huh?
It's a different way, not necessarily a weird way.
Well, yeah, weird for me. Sorry. Yes, you're correct. It's like I can't grok the visitor pattern, just for info. I'm not ashamed of that. So that's why, it took me a while again on GraphQL to see the value, because here everything is flat to some extent, and just like, okay, if you see person, go and execute it there. If you see a mutation of person, go on this method and then do some stuff.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Phillip.
Okay, so I've just added a mutation, so I can now change a person, either add it or update it. And all I do is I just add the add mutation annotation on the method, and now it becomes a mutation. So if I go back here, I should be able to do something like this. Right, so I'm creating a new person. I'm only adding a name, even though I'm asking back for quite a lot of fields, so they should all be null. But then I can go and do an update again and update the person by just providing those fields. Right, and then I get it back. And similarly, you can do a delete. So you can do the rest of the CRUD operations apart from read, just by adding an add mutation. Okay, so
show the code again.
The code.
Yeah.
I missed what happened here.
Update person.
Yeah.
So what if it was a delete then? Let's say it's a JPA stuff. So I update and delete are two different operations.
Yeah. So person, delete, person, and then I would probably only pass in the ID of the person to delete it, and then I can say person database, and you always return an object. So this will return the person that you've deleted. So the first time it will still have value. If I call it again, the person doesn't exist, so then it will return null. So I can just do this. And you can, by the way, if I want to name this differently, like I don't want to name it delete person, just maybe delete, I can just do this. Otherwise, it will just get it all.
Schema that would be exposed. Yeah, the verb in the schema. Okay. Yeah. So Syed, yes, we probably should watch the recording again. We did explore this notion of merging. Have a GraphQL with Panache. It's the early days. If you're interested, you go to Quarkus Dev. There is a few ideas that popped up during that conversation. I'll let you rewatch the recording.
Okay, I'm going to go a bit quicker because I want to get to the client if we have time. So I'm going to just show as well what we've done in Quarkus, and we'll eventually boil this up to the spec as well. But we've added support for metrics, small array metrics or microprofile metrics. So as an example, I can add this to my method, and now it will count how many times the person is being asked and time it. So if I go back here and I just do a get person again, person ID 1, and let's just do names and surname, and we'll do score again, name and value. Right, so if I do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, if you set up your Prometheus and Grafana properly, you'll see it'll start popping through here. So there you'll see it's obviously very quick because it's all in memory, but it works pretty well. And then we've also added in we've also added in Quarkus specifically support for tracing. So I've added the Open API tracing in the pom.xml, and you don't have to do anything more than that, and then you'll start seeing the traces, and you'll see like it will go down all the way to the scores as an example. So it'll find the source as well, and you can see how long each of those took.
So what is this system that you run on 16.60.86?
This is just Jaeger.
It's Jaeger. So you download Jaeger UI or something like that, and then it will display that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is normal tracing. Nothing specific to GraphQL.
I'm stupid and I don't know anything, which sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. So just keeping you on the edge.
Okay, then I want to show kind of back to Max's question. So let's say we want only admin people should be able to do the score. So I can do a normal at roles allowed on person as an example. So if I now go back here, I should now get an error, right? And it's on person, so I can't get partial data back. I just get the error back. I can now do, well, you can see that, but you can't see the score. So then I add it to scores, right? Okay. And then
just to reiterate, you will see the schema, but you won't be able to access the data because here you would filter if you don't have the rights.
Yeah, I can still see the schema, yeah. Like I said, we are talking about whether or not we should even remove it from the schema, but it does mean I have to have multiple copies of the schema which we don't know if it's a good or a bad idea. But yeah, I just get.
And if scores is a required field, then you want to have something returned, but just not.
So in my case, scores is not required. By default, no field is a required field, but you can make fields required if you want that, especially on an input object. So I'm just showing input here is just a basic int, which is a scalar in GraphQL. But specifically with mutations, you want a complex object like a person input, and then you want to say what fields is mandated and whatnot. So that was security. So
can you go on the field level or just on the?
And at the moment, just on this level, yeah. We also spoke about field level, but you can't even do that necessarily with JAX-RS, right? So I'm not sure whether or not we want to add it. Okay, so I'm going to stop the dev mode here, and I'm going to start this in with the jar, and then I'm going to go to another project, which is the client. Now, up until now, everything that I've shown is already in Quarkus, and you can use it as is. What I'm showing next is more in the pipeline, what we're busy working on. So I'm going to, if you know microprofile REST client, it's a type safe.
Just a little bit.
Just say again.
Just zoom in. It's like tiny.
Okay, so microprofile REST client allows you
bigger is what Max
to.
says.
Okay. Sorry.
Zoom. All right.
Okay. Right. So this is a microprofile REST client. It's a type safe REST client that allows you to build the endpoint that you want to query in an interface. So you never have to provide the actual implementation of this. You do register REST client and you say that I want to get person, and then you can define what person is for you as a client. So in my case, I only want these fields back. So what will happen if so this is REST client, right? So I'm going to make a REST call now. I'm going to start it in dev mode. And hopefully it works. So there it got the person back. It didn't get scores back because the REST endpoint doesn't have scores in it. And what actually happened under the covers here is that it made the REST call, returned all the 70 fields, but only populated the ones that you got in your person object. So you didn't save anything on network, but it does the filtering for you already. So what I want to do next. Yeah.
Can you go back again when you did that? I missed the trick.
So this is
client.
Yeah. So this is microprofile REST client.
Got it. Okay. Got it. Okay. I know that.
Now I'm going to do the same for GraphQL. So I'll do a customer GraphQL client. And then here we'll say that this is a at GraphQL Client API. We don't need that. And here we just want to say that we want to do a query. And we don't need this. So now I have exactly the same. We can remove all that. And then the diff, so this is just using Quarkus command line interface. So I'm just going to, okay, one thing that doesn't work yet, and that this is because I haven't yet created a Quarkus plugin for client. But once that is done, you should be able to inject it similarly like you do the client here. But you can't yet, so I'm getting it off the builder, right? And then I'm just going to print it out similar to the REST example. But with the difference being that now I get an error. Let's see.
You said you weren't done yet, so that's why. So.
Yeah, but you know what? This is so typical.
And it's not Quarkus inside without there being an error in the demo.
But what people can already guess the idea. The idea is that because you've defined the person on the client side, you exactly define the fields you want, and that's going to be used to build the GraphQL query that will be sent to the server without you having to create a JSON object manually.
Yeah, so it's
go ahead.
It's doing exactly what the REST client does, except that the network transport is much more efficient. Yeah, I'm not going to find the error now. I don't know why it doesn't work. Maybe, oh wait, there's a problem on my server side. Okay, so my server didn't start up properly. I assumed it did.
Maybe you shared the same
by
accident.
I can...
While you figure that out, so Ricardo was asking, so what are the practices client-side, a specialized Java library? So you can use whatever you want, but here what Phillip is showing is what's, I guess, is coming next in SmallRide, which is the client side of a GraphQL endpoint, and we want to have it nicely integrated in Quarkus, fixing the bugs we're seeing there, potentially. Which means you can have a type-safe way to, not have to write the query manually to some extent, but just have it be found from your object. Is there some goodness as well on the mutable aspect of things that you anticipate for that client side?
Sorry, I was now thinking of, just to repeat the question.
I wonder, so here it works great for the read side, so the add query side, where you define the subset that you want to fetch. But what about the mutation? Like, do you anticipate there will be help also, type-safe help from the REST client? Okay.
Yeah, that will be there. Plus, we also, apart from the type-safe client, there will be a client which is similar to the JAX-RS client, not the microprofile-RS client. The JAX-RS client is more a dynamic client where you can build it with a builder-type pattern. So if you don't know what it is and you need to do it dynamically, then you'll use that one. I don't have a demo of that, unfortunately. So I think it should work now, by the way, because it was I left the security in there, and we haven't done exceptions yet. So this might now work if I go back here.
When you say we haven't done, it's in the SmallRide client implementation. This is not handled yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So and now it failed and we don't handle the error yet. But now you can see that this is what I get back with REST, and this is what I get back with GraphQL. I actually get the scores back because I can. Plus this, what you see here is what actually was on the network, where this was a much bigger payload on the network. Yeah.
Awesome.
And okay, we're nearly out of time. I've got the only last thing that I wanted to show was introspection. So built in with GraphQL is the ability to do introspection. And what that means is that you can use GraphQL to query the schema. So I can do, at any time, I can actually ask the schema, so can you tell me a bit more about yourself, show me all the types and give me their names as an example. And then do you use GraphQL to query the schema, which is also quite cool. And that's kind of what I had prepared for the demo.
But just because now I have tons of questions now. But
like, one of the Komachi be somewhere right before the 6 minutes are out.
We got more. Yeah, I just want so here, because this is the great thing with the GraphQL. I hadn't noticed, or I hadn't realized until you just showed me this. You can kern the schema, Which in HeyOS you didn't have a schema, but you at least have a structured way of kind of navigating the model. But here it's actually more powerful. Is there any like clients, like UIs that's built on top of these? Because you can basically build a graphical client based on just the schema, based on you can query for stuff, you can delete, you can state. Do you know of any?
I don't know of any, but they might be. I'm not too sure.
Anyway, that's I just have
like a JHipster style thing where, based on the schema, they would generate the right UI for it.
Yeah, just like a query, like because one of the things I don't like about GraphQL is because it has this power, it's kind of complicated to kind of, as you said, and once you get it, then it's fine. But the reason why I like REST is like it's just one thing and it does one thing I get one thing back. Where in the GraphQL, so just be.
So Nando is saying that if you use Angular, Apollo has some sort of UI generator for your endpoints.
Okay.
So there was one question from the community before you go. We do one max question, one community question.
Yeah. Sure.
Syed has had another question, which was there you go. So any plans to introduce NoSQL backends like Neo4j and so on? So it's a multi-loaded question. So let me try and fan out the answers. So are you saying, are we going to offer panache for Neo4j? It's doable. It's going to be up to whoever is interested to do that work. We've done something with Mongo because Loic was really interested in making that happen. So Neo4j could be one. Can I call a Neo4j backend to write my GraphQL endpoint? Yes, because it's all custom code. You can go and fetch the object and then make it a JSON object, and then the proper filtering will happen at the GraphQL endpoint. Is there going to be a panache? So GraphQL with panache that talks directly to Neo4j. Again, it's going to require the panache for Neo4j first. So I think that gave the answer to everything here.
So you have the one that's very early in the beginning, which is similar to the question I want to ask. Is Carlos? He had this: what if I need to fetch data from 3 different microservices and somehow merge the response of all 3 microservices and then show it to the UI? Can I apply GraphQL in this context? So this is one edge of because for me the client side is very powerful. I can see it, but once you get to the server side, my head blows up. So this is one, like if you are a microservice, your backend is very microservice bound, and you're getting these queries. What do you do? I have my.
It works. It just works. Yeah. So imagine you do Philip. You say if I'm right or not, but you could have a add query for each of the top level objects you want to retrieve, and each of them implementation wise will actually go to microservice number 1, the second one to microservice number 2, and in the end, if you do a query that says give me person and address and country all from 3 microservices, you reach the first GraphQL endpoint, which is your gateway, and then it's going to fan out I suppose sequentially at this stage, but maybe we can parallelize this stuff at some point and fetch the data back.
But well, the thing is, my point is like, GraphQL lets you do this with less pain than others, but you still have the problem that you're querying 3 different servers to get your data. Right? Yeah. So, and that's where you have to go. Like, you might need to structure it differently, or But it's very nice you can do it. But this. Yeah, go ahead, Phil. You had a comment.
One of the things that we still also need to add to our implementation is support for microprofile fault tolerance, because if you start doing stuff like that, you're going to start having to have timeouts and retries and things like that. So you're going to need that, and we'll add that. And like I said, there is actually projects that does a gateway. So if what you are doing is a gateway type job, then use the gateway and have your 3 microservices either have GraphQL endpoints or not, and let the gateway merge them for you. Okay. But you could do it, you could code it as well if you want to.
Can I throw a grenade?
Yes.
Can I use non-blocking? Like, is there a reactive version of the work you've been doing somewhere in your head, at least somehow? Not yet.
Not yet. No, I mean, I know it's stuff that needs to be done, but I haven't gotten to that yet. So at the moment, the Quarkus is built on top of Vertex, but it's a blocking call from the client. Once it reaches the server, there's some because under the covers we use GraphQL Java, and they use some non-blocking under the covers, but nothing that we've done yet. That's still on the to-do list. Yeah.
Yeah, because so here's the thing where it goes like, yeah, one thing is this, multiple data service kind of thing where I think GraphQL helps you, but it doesn't solve like a problem of data being near you. But I'm like, if I look at, I have a nice data, like a model or whatever, and I'm using GraphQL, I'll end up implementing basically a small little database indexing service by having to do GraphQL, right? Because you have to do the once you have this basic stuff in place, you'll have clients who's going to hit you with queries that's going to be very inefficient because of the n+1 problem. So you have to add the context and optimization, and then suddenly, where does it stop?
Yeah, but I think it's up to you. You can shoot yourself in the foot by having too much of a complex schema for this one endpoint and having that problem of like, okay, too much information overflow, and then I'll do an n+1 multiply by n square problem, right? But remember how it started. It's like, look, guys, I want to fetch only the pieces of information I want, and maybe one of those associations maximum, right? And for those, the use case is perfect. You have your GraphQL endpoint, which is about persons, and then you go fetch that. That's why, by the way, I would love to be able to say person, just say this is the graph endpoint for person, and then I can navigate the graph up to what I've defined, and then another graph endpoint for, say, orders. And right now I would have to put it into two different microservices. I don't know if there's value in having it in a single one, or maybe I'm not internalizing enough this notion of a parallel fetch that that means that it's a doable thing without having to go into two different microservices.
But for me, it's like it's not even the great power I can see here is like just like Panas did the REST endpoint generation in last version, it could do the same for GraphQL because we actually have a JPA actually has a proper language behind it to do the same thing, right? So is there like is that on the roadmap of a mapping between the relational data, like something that's actually backed by a relational database and a GraphQL? They should be able to be get pretty fast.
Yeah. So it won't. I don't think it will ever be on the specification, because I think if we want something like that, we'll have a new specification. We might add it onto SmallRye, and there's projects. I've got a page open. There's, for instance, this project that does GraphQL for JPA. So map it to the JPA so that you can create better JPA queries based on your GraphQL. So there's stuff already available, not in Quarkus and not in SmallRye, and it's something we can look at. We can add it to our to-do list definitely, and then start adding mapping for all the known backends, or at least
But I think at some point it fails. Like there is so much you can totally automate, Max, when it gets too complex, right? You like me, we know the fallacy. It's awesome for like those 80% queries that are simple enough. Just I want to fetch person and person with pagination and maybe person with this associated country would be fine. But if you go a bit too complex, then at some point it's like it's gonna have to make choices which are probably not right? And you need a human to somehow review the concept of that query could happen. Is it fine?
You always need it, but I believe there's what's it called? If you have like the case that Carl was talking about, like you have 3 microservices which are literally just represented as Java objects or REST endpoint, you can't tweak them. Like you can't automatically tweak them. They are just like a black box you're calling. But if you actually do know that this part is actually backed by a JPA or a schema model, you can actually do the thing is described in a way, these things are actually in the same database. I can query across them rather than go and fetch them individually. So I'm not saying you will do this for everything because you can't, but I can just see you could, with a few annotations, just say, hey, I want to let you optimize automatically across this thing because these are just the basic CRUDs. And for GraphQL, it's okay to do queries across these, and then it just do it for you.
I would love to be wrong, but my gut feeling is it's a quite naive view of the world. It will work for the simple queries, and it will fall apart quickly enough.
What I'm saying is it works excellent for the ones that, like, just to have 3 different microservices. There you cannot do the query. You cannot optimize automatically,
Yes.
but you can here, right? That's my point.
Yeah.
Let's say person to scores. You know it's in the same. You can just do a join.
So
and
one
not
last
do.
one last question from the. We need to close. We're 5 minutes over. But there's one question around caching in the endpoints, especially in the case where you got those 3 microservices, but maybe one of them is the weather channel, or like, is there a way to cache endpoints, maybe even in front of? Okay, there you go.
Yes, so at the moment,
bigger, but then otherwise it's perfect.
yeah. So one of the things that you can do because of HTTP and the rest is you can use HTTP caching. But we actually just discussed it the other day, and we're not sure whether or not we'll want to support that, because again, we are building on top of the transport protocol, which we don't want to tie ourselves into with normal HTTP caching. So you can still do normal caching like you would any service without thinking about how you expose it over the wire. You can do caching, right? I don't think this is the right cache endpoint, because this pulls it from REST easy, but there's a JSR 107, I think, whatever the JCache API is, which allows you to cache, let's say, person as an example, and we can support that. We can start looking into building cache on the client side, similar to HTTP caching, and maybe an implementation detail could build it on top of HTTP caching, but we haven't done any of that yet. And I'm not sure how high on the priority list that is. I'm not sure how well it's implemented in JAX-RS or used in JAX-RS, if at all.
Yeah. So it's not so much the caching, but the reacting to the e-tags and whatever eviction policy. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. We're late. Maybe there will be a part 2 or part 1.5. We'll see how that goes. I think Max has another gazillion questions, so maybe we'll make that happen.
Yeah.
Thanks
good.
Very much, Philip. It was great.
Thanks.
I mean, I really loved it. So hopefully people here also loved it. Sorry, I couldn't go to all of the questions. You can, Philip, you're on Zulip somewhere, right? Or you?
I'm on Zulip. I'm on Twitter. Yeah, you'll find me somewhere. Yeah.
Go find him, and he will try and answer your questions and have a life and sleep and all of that. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Next week is, Max, you said, Mutiny number 2. Is it?
No. Next week is Debezium, and you're doing it with Georges. I'm
the
not here.
output pattern, which is like, how do I write to multiple systems without having a problem in a microservice universe, and change data capture, and all of interesting subjects around that with Gunnar. Thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe to the Quarkus channel. It's on youtube.com/QuarkusIO. There is a bell or something and a subscribe button. Just go and click it. Thank you, everyone, and see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.